And let's begin. I'm going to hide my panel so I can see my whole screen. Well, hey, thanks everybody. Thanks for being here. It's super cool to have you here. We're going to talk a little bit about what happened in 2022 and talk about some insights for 2023. Like a lot of questions. Is there a recession? There's all this economic uncertainty, but also just trends in fundraising, staffing trends, and other things. And hopefully it's just a conversation that can give you some ideas. Feel free to send me some questions in the Q&A. If there's some time at the end, maybe I can get to a couple of them. I'd love that conversation. And really, I mean, it means a lot for you, to me, for you to be joining us at this webinar. BWF is really proud to provide input. We have such wonderful people that work really hard to understand the space so we can really be an accelerator for your programs. Next month, there's going to be an amazing one from James and Jeff. James Barnard, Jeff Hallett on building a digital first annual giving program. That's in February. You can find that on our website, February 16th. And again, for those that are just joining, we are recording, which you'll see, we're recording the webinar, so it'll be available after the fact. And I think with that, I think we're going to get started. I'm probably forgetting something, but here we go. The 2022 year in review and insights for 2023. Now, the way I'm going to approach this is, as you all know, the Giving USA numbers, which is more the authoritative number on philanthropy in the United States, comes out in June every year. And so in 2022, in the middle of the year, those numbers came out. And I think those numbers inform how we started 2022, like where were we in 21 going into this, and how the different economic factors influence the overall giving number. We're going to talk about 2022, some of the things that happened. And instead of just trying to predict what's going to happen in 2023, we're going to talk a little bit about what we'd be advising people to think about and how they might adapt to some of the uncertainty of some things in the market, really to have a strong, sustainable program moving forward. Just by means of background, I'm Josh Birkholz. I'm the CEO at BWF. I'm also chair of the board of Giving USA, so I really enjoy digging into the macro numbers on giving and trying to understand the whole landscape so we can provide value to you. So thanks for this opportunity. All right, so let's look back. So we're going to look back at 2021 to see how that influenced the start of 22 and to reflect on, try to predict where the final numbers will be. Because of course, the year of 22, the final numbers won't be out until June, July timeframe. So in 2021, as many of you know, it was a record year in terms of dollars. We never had raised $484 billion before. We're about a $500 billion industry. And one thing I want to point out is on this chart, the kind of a yellowish or orangish goldenrod, whatever that color shows at you, those are years that had recessions in that calendar year. And when we go back throughout the history, and we've been tracking numbers for more than 50 years, more than 70 years almost, for that matter, giving has only gone down during recession a handful of times. In fact, usually it's resilient to recession, which is an important thing to consider, because a lot of us think the economy is more of a driver sometimes of philanthropy than it is. It's certainly a factor, but those of us working closely with major donors, it's not the first thing they always bring up, although if they're perhaps not interested, it might be the first thing that they bring up. Oftentimes other factors are a bigger driver of their philanthropy, but it's important to know that it does not always go down during recessionary periods. Certainly it went down considerably during the Great Recession. You can see the 3 consecutive years of declines there, but it jumped back really rapidly, and we knew it bounced back faster for organizations that had business models that were more geared towards the high net worth. So we saw the higher education and healthcare sector bounce back after that recession at a considerable pace, and it was largely because the upper end of income earners, of which made up the majority of the dollars to their charitable programs, were the people that recovered first. We've seen a sort of a flat to declining middle class for some time, also corresponding with dollars continuing to go up, but donor counts continuing to go down. And so also during that year in 2021, corporate giving broke 2 records. The first record is it gave the most dollars it had ever given. And the reason for that is that their pre-tax profits actually climbed by 37.4% in 2021 after a decline in 2020. Production was also up 10%. GDP was up 10.1% in 2021. Both of those correlate very strongly to corporate giving. And 21 was obviously a big rebound. But the other record that corporate giving set was a record low. The amount that corporations gave as a percent of their profits was at the lowest point in history at 0.7%. You can see back in 86, we had a peak of 2%. And so I'm not going to view this as a negative. I'm going to view this as a positive opportunity to encourage the value of philanthropy to our corporate partners. Certainly, they gave more than they ever have. But the percent of their profits that is allocated to charity seems to have been on a bit of a decline really since pre-Great Recession even. So low as a given a percent of profits. Giving as a percent, overall giving as a percent of GDP in the United States, we've hovered around 2%. We were down in the 80s back before that, it had been higher before, but roughly 2% of the total giving dollar is about the same as about 2% of our GDP. But that has been changing a little bit as the main measure, even though you can see there's some stability there. What we've started to see is the high net worth donors track closer with the asset markets than they do with production. So some of the organizations that have a higher number of major or principal gifts that are given out of assets as opposed to working income might have a little bit more of a relationship to the stock market and asset categories than to income and staffing and talent projections that are usually used as the measure of the health of the economy overall. So that has been a little bit of shift, especially as dollars continue to go up and donor counts go down. We continue to see philanthropy rise up towards the upper class, a trend that I hope doesn't stick around. I mean, I love all the high net worth giving, but as I often say, everybody deserves to experience the joy of giving. And we're certainly at BWF doing all we can to find ways to re-engage the base. And we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. So individuals, depending on how you count it, if you count the bequests or the individually directed like family foundations, individual giving, some would say as much as 85% of overall giving, some would say about 75%. I'm more of the about 85% of giving is really directed by individual decisions, making the decisions. And we saw growth in those areas. We saw the biggest year of outlier gifts in 2021, where about 10 households made up about 5% of all giving by individuals in the United States. And of those 10 households that gave about $15 billion, $10 billion was given by 3 households or individuals, depending. Elon Musk, Mackenzie Scott, and Bloomberg. And we estimate Mackenzie Scott might have actually underreported a little bit. In fact, she said she held back on some of the fourth quarter reporting. But those 3 made up $10 billion between them. Musk, presumably, we thought to a donor advised fund, but it's a private foundation. And Bloomberg, the Bloomberg Charities has certainly been a mature, long-standing contributor to many organizations, higher education, most notably to many of you. So individuals and foundations went well in 21. We saw all these numbers. They were great. The economy was good. Numbers were good. Where were we giving? Pretty much the stable pie chart. Some of these areas grew. I mean, religion has been sort of a slowly percentage decline, but it's still the largest chunk, followed by higher education. If you look at donor advised funds specifically, education is the top. Religious donors tend not to have converted their, say, plate and envelope or regular giving to their donor advised fund. So we see a little bit different mix in organized philanthropy than what we see in overall philanthropy in terms of sector. But mainly that's the difference, is that religion drops down from top among organized philanthropy. Now, in a few of the sectors in 21, the biggest climb, most notable climb was the arts. It was really an unprecedented jump, a growth of 27.5% in giving to the arts. And some of that is not just economically related. Some of that has to do with kind of our perceptions and feelings as a collective population about the arts. I personally was of the camp, and I've been revising my camp a little bit, that overall philanthropy sort of follows a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When times are tough, the giving to essential needs shelter, food security, to the people needing the help the most increases. And when times are really good, giving to what might be described in Maslow as self-actualization, the future, innovation, what I consider the arts about the human spirit, human condition, usually climb when times are good. But I think in the 2020 disruption, when we had no arts, we reevaluated what it meant to be part of a group, part of a community, and the value of understanding the human condition. That we started to realize that the connections we have to each other in the arts is an essential need. So I think a bounce back, it was partly because of that behavioral economics notion. But we saw some slight growth in health and religion after declines. Also in 2021, we saw 2 consecutive growth years in public society of benefit, environment, animals, and foundations. Now, PSB and foundations are the areas where most of the donor advised fund growth was. Public society benefit includes like the very large DAF sponsor organizations like your Vanguard, your Fidelity, your Schwab, organizations like that. The foundations include the community foundations, and we saw considerable growth in donor advised fund and other organized philanthropy that way. Environment, anecdotally, public spaces and park spaces saw some of the climb during the disruption and following a little bit more typical paths in 2021. Now, high level, I just want to quickly go through 21 because overall giving was up. We know it was up because the economy was good. The economic indicators were strong. The markers that are in the econometric models as we wait for the IRS e-files to come through all had good numbers, and it correlated with the giving trends. And as an economist, you could see GDP was up, the stock market was up, corporate profits were up. We also had a very high savings rate. Some of it's COVID related and others and different spending patterns. Saving rates were up. And back in 2021, even though inflation was a conversation a little bit, it wasn't the conversation like it was in 2022. It was not fully understood. And so we saw the continual trend of the dollars increasing and the donors decreasing. As the dollars have moved up the pyramid, we've seen increased growth and giving sophistication. The simplest measure of that is donor advised fund, which is a way of organizing philanthropy, but certainly other means of giving alternative assets and other sophisticated ways through financial advisors also tended to increase. And there was strong growth in many areas: the arts, health, environment, public society benefit, and foundations. So we all know where we were. So what happened in 22? Well, first it should be said it's too early to report. The Giving USA data comes out in June 2023. But all of those factors, nearly all those factors that led to record highs in 2021 are pretty much the other way. They're largely the other way. All these measures which has caused those concerns, of course, the inflationary concerns, recessionary concerns, market instability, uncertainty around multi-year financial commitments and so forth. Definitely probably the top word and cliched word is economic uncertainty. And when someone is making a multi-year pledge, uncertainty is not necessarily the best contributor to making that decision. Now, as an economist, if you view this purely from an economics lens, you would expect giving to be down. But I would say as a student of giving and knowing how giving has reacted in other recessionary periods, we've seen growth more often through recessionary times than we see declines. I'm actually suggesting that it's likely up, and I have been saying that in terms of dollars, but it's going to be hitting the middle class maybe more pronounced and perhaps some of the mid-level even than we've seen in years past. Now, a few others have said this as well. The first published that was the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, which first said in October of 2022. I think the Chronicle of Philanthropy recently just did a paper also referencing this FEP, or an article just this last week. But I highlighting that in their initial reports, the donors drop is about 7% by their math, and the dollars up by about 6.2%, again, buoyed by the top of the pyramid. Early reports are showing that this long-term trend of dollars up, donors down continues to be continuing. But at the same time, there's anecdotally lots of reports of multi-year pledge hesitancy, needing flexibility around pledge payments and questions like, can I give you the first payments equivalent this year, and then let's talk about a pledge next year. So some of those things are happening now. I would not recommend around hesitancy. Don't run if you're not chased, but it's anecdotally what we're hearing from some of our clients, and also from some of the other member firms of the Giving Institute. Which, since I said that, I do want to remind you all that the Giving USA Foundation, which I'm the chair of the board, and I love the work that it does as a service of the public good. The way that data is funded every year is the member firms of the Giving Institute, which is a professional association of consulting firms like ours and technology firms and service groups like us, the software companies, the screening companies. We donate what ends up being about half of the cost of that report, and then the subscriptions cover about the other half of that report. But certainly everyone can give to the Giving USA Foundation, and if you find value in the data, I do encourage you to give to the Giving USA Foundation. But now continuing, with us dollars up and donors down, we're getting more questions than ever about these high net worth donors. And really, the playbook has been easy to describe, even though we know it's a lot of work, it's a lot of activity working with them. But as we know, they are driven by solving big problems. In fact, they're often very driven by an instrumentality message. As opposed to an intrinsic value of giving, which most altruism at a lower level is we give because giving's a good thing to do. It's a cultural value and so forth. And some have argued, and I've seen some reports and some inference, I'd say the Generosity Commission's a good area. I also hold this view that maybe because we've become so effective at instrumentality, or saying we give so that, or we give for the purpose of impact, that maybe that message can be lost on donors that think my $50 may not mean as much as that $50 million gift. So I also encourage messages of intrinsic value, of giving's a good thing. It's fun to do. Imagine like me personally, when I give my kids birthday gifts or holiday gifts and so forth, I love giving, and even my kids love it when dad opens their present. They think that's super cool. We all have that. We have that kid in us who loves to give other people presents, and with our gifts, there's an inherent joy regardless of instrumentality. But regarding the instrumentality of these high net worth donors, we do know that there's sometimes questions of their power dynamics, even though we've got disruptors like Mackenzie Scott, who kind of turned that on its head and said that I trust you to make those decisions. Amazing. At the same time, there is this definitely question of power dynamics and control. I would say from my observation that the underlying driver is less control and it's more credit. And now I know I'm splitting hairs, but I found places that really acknowledge, they tell the donor story, let them be a hero in the narrative, in a sense, when they say, yes, you're the one who cured this disease, or I know that's maybe a bold thing to say, but someone who wants a big problem to be solved, if they're getting the credit, it's less likely that they manifest some of the power and co-creation dynamics. Now, there's certain exceptions, especially with foundations that have high needs for program evaluation and so forth. But at the individual, credit has a lot of power to no pun intended, combat power dynamics. Now, corporations obviously have what might be called the most selfish altruism. I know that's paradoxical, but there's usually a benefit to them from the public relations. They benefit from the research, the talent, and so forth. And the primary personas are, one, the long, deep relationships. So some of the biggest donors have been with an organization for a very long time, but the biggest growth area has been what you might call passion donors, and people that seemingly came out of nowhere. They didn't really, but their top passion aligns to something that your program is the best at doing, or the most likely to solve the problem that's important to them. Just as an aside, the Giving USA Foundation is sponsoring a research project that you'll see in the next year around some of these atypical principal gift type donors and kind of their persona and some of their drivers. So I look forward to seeing that. We'll make sure that you all are aware of that when that comes out. And the way that these high net worth donors, oftentimes there's multiple components to their gifts, multiple interactions. We measured at one organization that a $5 million plus gift on average had 39 interactions with them. There's a requirement of access to the leadership, to the board, to the problem solvers, and a boldness of language track record of success. You hear comments like moonshot or really BHAGs and things like that, which is common language to appeal to this group. I've often said that giving is very similar to our transaction processes. A base level donor giving $50 or $100 often likes a good experience, maybe part of a community, good friction reductions. Imagine buying a book at Amazon. They're really good at friction reduction. It's really easy. I trust that it'll get here and so forth. Once I'm getting to the $1,000 level, I might want to talk to a human, but I don't want a lifelong relationship with the person. So that's why you'll see bricks and mortar for cell phone or for car sales, for example. You might want to talk to a human before I buy $1,000 phone, but I don't need to build a relationship with the T-Mobile salesperson per se. I just want that high touch interaction. When we get to houses, where we're starting in the 6-figure plus range, that's when we want the person selling to understand what we're looking for and align houses to our needs and to our budget and our abilities, and help us find this is the best one where you're going to really enjoy in your price range. And obviously in mergers and acquisitions, you want to have the books open to you. Is this a good investment? Is this worthwhile? And similar, the friction reduction, the loyalty for the base donor, the high touch, but and high transaction volume in the mid-level, the really learning the donor need at that major gift level, and then opening up access to leadership, to the board, to the problem solvers at the principal gift. That's something we've certainly continued to see, and I wanted to have a special call out on that because we had such a growth in this type of giving in 2022. Now, and 21, the year before, of course. Now, the base of support, this is the one that we're not going to let that go. We are going to put a stake down, and we've invested considerably, certainly our first name subsidiary, which has been really effective and in the digital marketplace, where we're seeing that even though the donor counts are declining, there are bright spots. Giving days continue to post records. Certainly the Giving Tuesday had their record at 3.1 billion. We've seen real evidence that mass personalization and digital campaigns is showing growth at organizations that have really done that, invested in the marketing automation and the retargeting. And ultimately, they've decided that and realize that we're not just competing for philanthropic dollar anymore. We're in a competition for attention, which means nonprofits, if they want to compete for the base of support, we need to compete for attention where the donors are, and that's in a digital marketplace. If a donor has visited your charity, and when they go to YouTube, are they seeing your video first, or are they seeing a video for new socks or whatever it is? I don't know why I said socks, but it made me happy anyway. So anyways, the digital marketplace, how we're competing for attention in new ways. So like at donor engagement centers, this is one that we've really invested in, seen some really wonderful success. My colleague Justin, he looked at the phone programs that so many organizations have, especially in universities. They have the student calling centers. And I always like to joke, it's sort of like a bad stand-up comedian routine. Have you seen the kids today? Like, none of them know how to talk on the phone. And, as a Gen X parent with Gen Z kids, I can attest that that's absolutely true. And at the same time, none of us answer the phone. So like you could have a whole Seinfeld, like, what is it with kids today? That kind of a thing. And I think that we realize that, yeah, why? No wonder our phone programs are declining. People aren't answering the phone. The kids don't know how to talk on it. So he's like, well, why don't we let them be in the world that they know? And basically hired teams to be influencers for the campuses, engaging with donors in ways that are more natural for their generation, and capturing the attention of alumni where they're actually paying attention in the digital channels, and seeing these programs exceed the phone program their first year everywhere that we put those in. I just love that concept of using the students in a way that really meets their talents as a real promising thing, in a way that we're investing in that base of support. Now, the other areas in 22 that appear to be granting up, and Fidelity was the first to publish this, and at the end of the year, they're still saying that even though the numbers aren't final, is they were the first to report that their grants are surpassing their deposits in 2022. And I think that's an important consideration because it's also an opportunity. When the market is up, gifting your gains is a good tax strategy. And if you have a donor advised fund, that's a great way to do that. A lot of people gifted their gains in 2021. which meant that in 2022, they had a higher funded donor advised funds and foundations, more money to grant out. And so Fidelity said, indeed, more people granted out of their donor advised funds than gave to in 2022. At least that was what their projections were showing. We're still waiting to see what the final is on that, and maybe it's out today. We'll see. But the gains that were contributed to DAFs and foundations in 21 are being granted out. So there's some well-funded DAFs. It doesn't make sense to donate your loss, but when you donate your gains, it enables you to manage some continuity in giving despite economic uncertainty. In fact, we might start to see more stability in high net worth donors because of more organized philanthropy, just like we saw in the foundation sector, sort of two-day rolling lags against economic downturns among foundations, even while corporate, which would have been out of current pre-tax profits, are such an immediate and sometimes even ahead of the curve, leading in terms of economic downturns. It used to be a high net worth was leading too. I remember back in 07, going into the Great Recession, we had people saying, I'm just not so sure I want to make a pledge right now. I feel like something's looming in the economy. And we didn't know what they were talking about because it wasn't a story for us, but somehow the high net worth knew first. So now I realize maybe in our profession, the folks on our team from our campaign division that are interacting with donors every day, they might be able to see some of these things before others. And we are paying attention to what the high net worth says to see if that's predictions for the future. So grants appear to be trending up. And 2021 was the busiest campaign season in memory by an informal poll within the Giving Institute, and that's continued in 2022. And that's largely because of the disruption of 2020. Campaigns that were set to launch were on hold, and others extended, and then those that were set to start during 21 and 22 did start. So we have an overlapping of timeframes that will probably even out depending on as campaign lengths are having more variability across sectors and within organizations. But a lot of donors are referring to a crowded campaign season. Seems like everyone's in a campaign, and it's what that says. It's really essential to have a compelling and distinct case for support. Kind of a so what of your case is so important. Now we've known for years the purpose of the campaign. Obviously is to manufacture urgency for staff, urgency around the priorities, dedicated efforts, but also urgency for the population. Because especially with long-standing nonprofits that have considerable value, the general person would, of course, agree with you. Of course, this is an important organization. It has value. But it's hard to translate long-standing institutions into a, but why now should I give? And the campaigns have enabled us to do that. Now, if everyone is saying why now, how distinct and compelling is probably more important now than it ever has been. Maybe stealing from the unique selling proposition comments or the unique funding proposition. The talent gaps continued in 22 considerably. The talent gap is a perennial challenge. Now, I know there's reports this week that in early 23 that we saw some recovery from the dip down that was because of the COVID disruption. However, many would argue going into the COVID disruption, we were already at a considerable talent gap. Some would argue as much as 35% is amount of positions that were not filled in terms of a vacancy rate, a supply-demand imbalance. So even though we've recovered the losses from the COVID disruption by the end of 22, we're probably back to where we were going into the disruption, which is still upside down. Because of that, though, what it did is it opened up, because it got even worse for folks in 2021. What we saw is a significant increase in managed services, automation, outsourcing job functions, even areas that had never been outsourced before. Charities across sectors were doing a lot more of that. I mean, certainly for us, we're like, they're like, can you just be our data science department for the next year? I'm like, sure, or lead our annual giving program. For a company that historically was more diagnostic, I would say we are doing more doing than we are assessing, which is a fascinating shift in the professional services. But as a result, with the supply-demand imbalance, there's a high degree of transiency, as there is with anything. You see prices go up and transiency, so increased retirements, job changes, jumping organizations, but also wage inflation. Somewhat combated with some increased flexibility, which is a bright spot that has helped in some organizations. I'm going to talk a little bit more about talent in what we do in 23. Now, technology changes have also continued at a rapid pace. You'd have to have your head in the sand to not see how many people are converting their databases. And it's not just in the nonprofit sector. Overall in Salesforce, including corporations and nonprofits, they had a 21% growth rate in 2021. And again in 22, their growth rate was 21% on top of that. Microsoft Dynamics had a huge jump in 21 with 49% and continued to grow at 24% in 2022. So we're seeing the CRM conversions continue to grow, certainly the case in our sector, not just with these, there are probably giants in the room. Also, there's lots of obviously technology solutions, a huge growth in marketing automation solutions. And that's starting to, I remember, now I've been consulting since 2004. And I remember when people called about annual giving programs, it used to be Libunts, Cybunts, new donors, it was channels. Now the first questions are, which marketing automation solution do you recommend? How do you identify your personas? Should you have a dynamic model for your personas? What about retargeting? What's the right workflows? The questions are completely different, and we're realizing that we need that sophistication to compete in that digital marketplace. And we've seen a growth in dynamic modeling and AI. I know it's an area we've invested over time. When I came in 2004, I remember when I would build an AI model, a neural network, that would take me a week, and now you can do it very quickly. But to make the right choices, just because we can do something every minute, do we need new prospects every minute? Maybe you do in areas of dynamic affinity, such as patients or in patrons and so forth. But there's also dynamic affinity in terms of behavior. After I go to an arts show, I like the theater more now than I did before. And we realize when we're talking with friends, and like I was just joking, someone asked me what my favorite car was. I'm like, oh, I love the Aston Martin. Maybe it's the James Bond movies when I was a kid. And of course I open Facebook and get the Aston Martin ad on my Facebook, which we all know, we've all been there. And however, the nonprofits have not all been there. And now that kind of mindfulness around sentiments and connecting AI to marketing automation is within our reach. So that's been a huge growth market. Now, DEI, in some ways, I'm excited by it, but I'm also frustrated. Where I'm excited is this is remaining a priority for our organizations, for nonprofits. They're staffing towards it. They're putting attention towards that. Where I'm disappointed is that it's been dropping as a top priority among donors. In 2020 and into 2021, when people ranked what they found most important in charity, DEI was on top of the list. It started to shift down in 22. But I don't think anyone's losing heart. They're maintaining it. We've been trying to really look not only at our own diversity, and we've certainly invested some money into that and a strategy and a plan, but also with our work. And I'm really excited about this data inclusivity article by Shannon Cooper and Joelle Clements on her team, because I really think one of the areas is the data itself. And with my deep history of an affinity for prospect development, which I still think is an engine that steers the future, the ability to identify who will the donors of the future be, not who are the donors of right now, and how that influences combating bias and model development, and being purposeful and proactive prospect identification, and even encouraging diversity through assignment protocols and in the prospect management process. I think data and prospect development can be a big driver of moving this forward in the marketplace, but certainly all of us be mindful of it. So it continues to be a topic. I wish it was more of a priority among the donor space. It certainly is among some. It's not all or nothing, of course, but there's slight declines there, but pleased that it's remaining a priority for nonprofits. Now, the other area, and largely I'd say this is related to the talent challenges that we've had, but not only that, the global conversation about what does it mean to be in an empowering work environment where we value culture, when the employees can be at home or can gig economy or be an influencer and set up a TikTok page, why would they come into the office? And other research, I know I'm a big fan of Keel's work from the book Return on Character, where he really made that connection between the most innovative companies had the most measurably forgiving environments. If I know I can mess up and be forgiven for that, I'm more likely to take bigger risks in terms of innovation. Then we saw the Amy Edmondson book on fearless organizations, and suddenly psychological safety became a thing. Sarah Gledhill in the UK has been doing academic research on it. I just super love that she's doing that. And kind of those questions about being outcome-based, like, do we really value the time people work, or seeing them, or being is that what we value, or do we value the work that they accomplish? And really getting more precise about empowering work environment that values outcomes and culture. I think it's a really critical piece. And I know I'm working with our own team. We're going through, I love to teach topics in our first Fridays for our first couple of your new consultants at BWF. And that's an area that I just love to do. And we're taking the topic of psychological safety this next month. Very excited about that. All right. Another piece that's really climbed in 22, which has not seen much attention for many years. I mean, certainly in disruption, people will say, keep close to your donors, make sure you thank people. And of course, but we've not seen the sophistication grow in donor relations like we've seen it in prospect development, with data science, like we've seen with Andy Giving, with workflow marketing automation, with other areas, technology, with the CRM conversions. But now we're starting to see that this donor journey and some of these concepts actually don't apply to just what does it take to become a donor, but what is it like to be a donor? How can that experience be better? And we've seen some data that really shows that this is an important thing to take into consideration. One of them that's a relatively easy thing to get our heads around is actually when donors are friends with each other. So that just means, and we did this, we've asked this in studies, we said, are you friends with another major donor? And it was a simple yes or no question. But when we compare that to forecast models around lifetime value, just by being friends with another donor, we were seeing as much as 4 times to 5 times more lifetime value from that donor. We also saw resilience during economic uncertainty. And then also affiliation. What are those drivers of affiliation? What we do know, and there was an AMA study back in 2015, which was the first to cite that donor breadth is positively correlated with resiliency during economic downturns. That was Farnoosh Kodakarami, published in the American Marketing Association in 2015. Community building community, but also proactive identity communications. Now, identity communications is something the for-profit world has tackled long before the nonprofit world, although we do have a few that are doing that quite well. And I like to say it's sort of the analogy I use, since most of us have had this experience, is maybe you have an iPhone or an Android. I happen to be an iPhone user. You buy your first iPhone, then you're like, okay, they're slowing it down. I'm gonna buy another iPhone, and then now I'm a slave to my iTunes. So why don't I get the iPad? So now I got a tablet, I got an iPad. A few months later, I end up getting a Mac computer. Then I get my kids Mac computers. Eventually, at some point, we're sticking an Apple sticker on our car window. How does it happen that you go from buying products to saying, I am an Apple person? Part of my identity is as a person who buys Apple, as can clearly be seen as this Apple sticker on my car window or on my water bottle. What they've done there is, it's not just that you're buying their products, they've connected to you as, I'm the type of person that buys this type of product. And charities are starting to realize that donors are not an outside force in our missions. They're part of our mission. They don't give so that we can accomplish this impact. Their giving is part of the aspect of the impact. And how do we treat them as part of the change agents, part of the impact in new ways? And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit as we move forward. So from those learnings, we captured where we were. Times were great in 21. We loved the markets. We love production. And wow, when the economy's good, giving is fantastic. So many people had the record years. 2022, almost all the numbers went the other way. But early reports say giving is probably still up. We just have this trouble with the future generations because the base of support continues to decline. And it's something I think we should all value, or we're robbing from future campaigns, is the base is continuing to decline. When we've seen changes in technology, how we work in the digital marketplace, how we interact with our staff, what we value and what do our donors value as part of their donor experience. And so now we've got looming recession, we've got looming uncertainty. What are ways that organizations should adapt? Well, just like your financial advisor, when they say you should have a diverse fundraising or a stock portfolio, an organization should have a diversified fundraising portfolios really across the board with, and I'm just kind of the big buckets, but certainly there's lots of buckets for your corporate giving, maybe doing some sector-based analysis according to economic resiliency, which sectors are doing well. Like sometimes with climbing interest rates, some of the financial services sector climbs. We certainly saw some growth in oil. We've had kind of a rough week. Oil went down a little bit and some others, but I like to say that someone's always making money. Are you able to find who's making money? With foundations, talk to them, have conversations with top foundations, learn their shifting priorities. I just had a deep conversation with a faith-based foundation just this week on where they're focusing, and they're investing in some of their nonprofits, and they're giving grants in exchange for some capacity building. So they're helping fund training for major gift officers, and specifically, so they're actually funding fundraising, which I thought was fantastic. They're funding the fundraising office, doing some training, and if they have some milestones around infrastructure build, then they're giving grants on top of that further unrestricted operation, so that the operational is really making the case towards an operational ROI to really get a ripple effect. High net worth donors, increase contact and access to leadership and the board. Think about N of 1 strategies. If this person can give as much as our whole annual fund, are you putting as much strategic thought into that one person's relationship? I get it, it's different. We have scale and costs and other considerations, but I like to use that as a figure of speech to think about the strategy that is required for some of those high-level gifts. And then the base level individuals, positive messaging, avoid neediness, digital communications, being really authentic. Coming through COVID, the tolerance of corporate speak and overly polished language has diminished considerably. People like you to talk plainly now more than ever. And areas in prospecting is prospecting for resilience. I talked about corporate sector resilient sector analysis as it's connected to individuals, your people, whether regardless of sector, like where do they work? Is their field likely doing well? Their type of work, etc. Also, the top philanthropic priority donors, prospecting for those, especially if you're doing a unique funding proposition, you need having prospecting plan for those groundbreaking priorities that you're highlighting. But also one thing that we found has been effective is to look at past downturns when giving has gone down or when there's been economic uncertainty and say, all right, who gave despite all of that uncertainty in the past, where we saw that their giving actually even grew or maintained. And as a predictive science, I shouldn't say guru, fanatic, I love it. I love following all the gurus in it, but in the predictive science space, what I love is the idea of if you can identify a population, you can probably study that and maybe predict that. Find all the people that gave despite it going down, make them a dependent variable in your predictive model, and even just run some regression between them and the individuals that went down when the recession went down. See if you can find what those different characteristics unique to your organization are. If you have a data science team, that might be a really fun project for them. Okay, prospecting for diversity. As I mentioned for that Shannon and Joelle's article that you can find through BWF, the data strategy to capture diversity, looking at your predictive modeling methods, being purposeful, being thoughtful about that, proactivity in your prospect identification, and encouragement. Oftentimes, just encouraging and just saying it, reminding it is really important in all ways of seeing and unseen of diversity, that everyone feels included and part of changing the world through the great work that you're doing. Flexibility with your donors. I've had several high net worth donors that are struggling ask for, can I hold off on my payment this year? It's a good idea to be flexible as you can, because you want to keep them around. It's a good donor relations thing to have some flexibility. But also for new prospects, discussing conditional pledges. Like if they say our stock is not trading well, ask, like, would you be willing to make a pledge if your stock hits a certain point, and then monitor what those thresholds are. Be creative in design, planned versus outright, blending corporate and individual, pooling. Anytime there's downturn, it becomes more popular. The DAO concept is a type of pool, family type giving, pooled concepts, even encouraging it among those that are uncertain, and having a group that that they might be able to engage can be really effective in times like this. As I mentioned, monitor for those gift indicators. If it was around a stock price threshold, or if a company sale appears in it. They once said, all my money's illiquid and tied up in my private company, and you're monitoring for when those private companies sell. Those liquidity events are important moments of charitable consideration. Has the last child graduated from school, where they're in a life stage change, if they're parents with kids, for example? Did they hit a milestone that they've mentioned previously? Monitoring for that is a lot of times people will ask, like, oh, if this happens, and then it's in the gift officer's mind, it might be in a rogue contact report, but it's not necessarily been formalized with prospect research. Can you track for this thing for that person, for example? Investing in the infrastructure of fundraising, extending your reach through a leveraged staffing model. That's one thing too. It's over the last several decades, fundraising went from just, let's say, universities, arts organizations, healthcare organizations, just hiring fundraisers, to now having a business of fundraising, where we have people doing different tasks that aren't fundraising so that we can get the highest ROI off of that interaction dollar. So we have people processing the gifts, doing the technology, finding the prospects, providing donor experience management, et cetera. And that concept of distributing the tasks, as organizations grow, those roles continue to narrow, but sometimes with high levels of turnover, that pathway starts to stagnate, and we don't see that same growth. And there's ways to actually invest in operations. We had one organization where just investing in operational staff, the forecasts were that their net dollars would rise because of doing top of license analysis. And I'll talk about that, I think, in the next slide, top of license analysis. But cross-department, multi-channel warming, how can the ecosystem help with fundraising? Now, I had this long conversation, and maybe you're on, I think it was Maddie Einen over at MIT, and we were talking about, it's not just the fundraisers that raise money, the whole ecosystem raises money. And I was using this analogy for me to help process this concept. I used to have season tickets to our local NHL hockey team. I live in Minnesota, so it was the Minnesota Wild, a big hockey fan. I had them for 9 years. I stopped actually a year before the recession, or not recession, the disruption of COVID. But for all those years, I was thinking about, why did I buy those hockey tickets? Well, one, I loved hockey. I loved the play on the ice. I liked the community of being in the stadium. I enjoyed bringing my kids there. There was also marketing that came to me, ads through the television about the tickets. I eventually went to a fan experience event. I signed up, I became a season ticket holder. And at that point, I had a season ticket rep. Now, she would call me up, and she was great. She brought me gifts and things, and like in the holidays and stuff. But she would call me up and say, hey, I know you're trying to move closer to the glass. We've got this one that's, it's just a little bit more than your tickets right now. Are you interested? And so she would nudge me up. But I did not become a season ticket holder just because of the mad skills of my season ticket rep. It was the whole organization that caused that. And even so, many of our gifts are because of brilliant fundraising strategy by the fundraisers. Can we take lessons from that ecosystem and think of, are there other ways that we can warm and provide data assist and be nurturing part of the journey to help with that process of cultivating fundraisers? Do we think about it that way? The technology and change management during campaign transitions, a lot of you are there right now. It's a good time to invest in that. Now, the top of license analysis is a healthcare term where they'll say the doctor probably should do this thing if a trained nurse can do that. A trained nurse should do that if a medical assistant can do that, et cetera. You see that in law firms, that the partner shouldn't be writing the will, the paralegal can write the will, and maybe the partner interacts with the client, et cetera. So which activities depend on personal interaction? That's a high dollar cost. Which don't? Which things can be scaled through technology? Which things can be outsourced? What can be accomplished with lower cost employees? What are the obstacles to us hitting the maximum performance per team member? Are our fundraisers doing a lot of things that someone could do at a lower cost so that we can increase their performance? If our metrics are low, is it because of effort? If it's because of effort, Do they need encouragement or accountability? If it's because of capability, can we do training? If it's a situation they're in, can we identify better to make sure that they're in situations that they'll be more successful? Are there tasks that can be done better at the same costs, can be done the same for a cheaper cost, or can be done at scale? These are questions of a top of license analysis, which can actually be a way to increase dollars raised without increasing staff costs. It's really more of a staff reallocation, or maybe it's a higher ROI off of the staff costs that you're able to go to bat for. So around the donor community development, being purposeful of connecting donors with each other, saying, hey, you should meet Sally. She's an amazing donor. You two would really hit it off. Like, just be purposeful about that. Because as I mentioned before, when donors are friends with each other, especially if they become a group of friends, the connective tissue is they're giving to you. Now, I don't mean this in a sense of manipulation, but more of as a powerful reinforcement of that community dynamic. If I were to stop giving to you, I'm not just severing a tie with you, I'm potentially severing a tie with this group of friends. But rather viewing it as a loss, it's more of a positive. We actually find value in being together as people that donate to this organization. Sometimes people say that, in fact, Willie, who's on the call, we were chatting just last week, and he said, relationships, this is always the relationship business, but relationships can't scale. And I'm like, but communities can scale, communities can rally. And we had a great conversation about the strength in communities when individuals are together. This is always a relationship business. It always will be, but the technology enables us to be more effective and extend the reach of the relationships we can build. And it enables anyone, regardless of their level, to feel like they're getting the same personalized level that a major donor would get. Think about community at the major gift level and at the base of the support based on that. And think about group identity messaging. So I was talking about that Apple example. The one I've seen do it, what I think is the best, where the donors are really thought about, I'll use the Seth Godin quote, people like us do things like this, is Charity Water. I think, and I went to their website and I pulled up this slide and I thought, wow, that's really fantastic messaging. So here it is. This is how they spoke to their donors on their donor impact report page on their website. Might still be up there. This incredible community is composed of generous, passionate, and determined people like you from more than 100 countries around the world. They're world changers and history makers, and you're going to fit right in. This isn't give to us because of our impact. This is you're making impact. You're the world changer. You're the history maker. People like us do things like this. We're the ones that are generous, passionate, determined people changing the world. That's wonderful messaging, especially if we're trying to find group identity and community. And finally, nurture your greatest asset. We talked about the transiency, the moving around, the increase in terms of salary costs, also the questions about the relationship with work. What does it mean to have psychological safety, to be empowered, that culture matters? What are the values? I'm going to choose my job based on the values because I have choices. Take care of your people. It's the most important asset you do have. Provide empowerment. We know that a lot of times people go to holding feet to the fire first. We found that the top fundraisers are those that care the most deep about the mission. In fact, we see a considerable difference because when they care deeply about the mission, they ask more often. They're more bold in their asks. The donors feel that this fundraiser would give the same gift if they had their resources. They have authenticity. Empower, show people, expose them to the mission. Procedural fairness, transparency around that's the best way to build trust in an organization. I know what the rules are, and the rules are applied fairly, and it's clear that they're applied fairly. It's one of the only proven ways to build trust. Provide forgiveness if you want innovation. Encourage that. Fail well, as they say in Silicon Valley. Commit to psychological safety in the work environment. Read about it. Just learn about what it is. Have dialogues with other leaders in philanthropy to talk about how do we make this a more rewarding work environment? Because when employees love what they do, they love what we're doing, that shows in their interaction with donors, and there's hard math behind it that they perform better. Expose your team to the mission, remind them of the why, and encourage that boldness, which will invariably flow out of that why. So those are just some of the high-level things that I think you might want to consider. And I know I'm just scratching the surface. Anytime you try to capture a whole year and what's going to happen in the future, we're going to miss stuff. I'm sure I missed stuff, and this is just one perspective. Please talk to others, listen to others. What I love about this space of philanthropy is we're all doing the same thing. We all care about the world. We believe that the nonprofit sector has the ability and is essential for solving the world's problems. And we're the elementary school teachers, we're the coaches, we're the trainers of this world. All of us in fundraising are teaching people how to make amazing impact and look back at what for many of them was the most important thing they ever did in their life. I believe in giving. I believe in the intrinsic value of giving, and I believe in the instrumentality of the so that it really does do great things. So thanks for doing what you do. And I'm gonna look at the Q&A. If you have some questions, or I think I have time for like maybe a couple, and if not, I apologize. We'll see if we can find a way to address some of those questions offline. And while I look at some of those questions, I'm going to go to this next slide, which is a QR code. Now, this QR code is a survey. I know some of you are sitting in a room, maybe watching this on a screen, and it's maybe tough to do your own survey. Even if it's just on the laptop in front of you, this enables individuals to give their own personal survey about your experience and how we can do better to provide information that you need to help your programs. So I'm going to look in the Q&A. And so one of the first questions was around the Giving USA. Does it count gifts when they go into the donor advised funds and when they come out to DAFs or nonprofits or both? We did a special report. There's a special report on donor advised funds that dug into both. So it's not the overall annual report, but there's a special report on donor advised funds, which if you're a subscriber, you have access to all of the Giving USA special reports. And we sponsored research to look at the inflow and outflow. Within Giving USA itself, we do have a methodology that I'll probably save the time, but it is captured in terms of like giving to we have it netted out, and I'm going to probably get this wrong, but the inflow is counted in the sector that the donor advised fund is in. So it is captured within there. The outflow is captured in the giving from foundations in terms of the grant making. And so it is captured in there. And we've been working on revising methodology. It's been a big area of research, and the latest edition, the 2022 Giving USA, which was the report on 2021, has an entire chapter on donor advised funds, which does spell out the methodology much better than today's speaker is able to do. But I do encourage you to check that out. If you've got it on your shelf, it's right there. So we've seen growth at, Elizabeth is asking, our organization, others have seen double-digit year-over-year growth in middle donors and leadership annual giving. Other donor groups have seen declines, and can we shine some light on this, macro reasons for this? I know it's not always apples to apples. Some middle donor programs are the upper end of the annual fund, which is often income-based and a result of a donor journey. Some are more of a proactive, which can end up being an entry point of asset-based donors. Those two behaviors are different. Those middle donors that are more likely to be giving out of appreciated assets, which could include entrepreneurs or business people that are already asset wealthy, or those ones that are in retirement that are given at the middle level. Those that have their giving coming out of their assets were more likely to have grown last year. Those that came out of their income were more likely to have declined. It could be that your program is resonating with a different segment. That's a best I've got from a macro view. There was some concerns over the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act on its impact. And I think Indiana University suggests to be about a 13-14% decrease in the mid-level. And that proved to be pretty accurate in the macro sense as a direct result. However, they countered too that actually some of the economic growth from that might have led to overall net philanthropy. So probably not a direct answer, but those are some initial thoughts. All right, so now we've got a question around from Carolyn. Thank you. Given the exceptional giving we've experienced during the pandemic and the current economic climate, what forecasting recommendations do you have? Should we go back 5 years to look at average growth to help even out those potential extremes? I would go before and through and do some outlier, some smoothing. This could be a long answer to the question, but I would do all there's different considerations. What I'd say first is the base of support. Yes, I would go further back and try to take into account the trend line outside the dip. Second, for your major donors, what you'll find is your officer behavior is probably more predictive than your past production. So I might look at officer close rate, tenure as factors and what their close rate against the assigned pool is. At the high net worth, I would do a manual projection rather than an economic forecast. And I realized over time, and I was told I should have asked the last question, but I do want to thank you for all your questions, and we're going to try to save this Q&A so I can get back to many of you. They're wonderful questions, and I hope that this was a valuable session for you. I really enjoyed speaking with all of you, and I really care so deeply for you all. I know I said that, but thank you for doing what you do, and thank you for letting me and the BWF team be part of your journey. Stay tuned in February 16th. Building a digital first annual giving program is going to be the next topic of discussion. So with that, signing out. Thank you so much. Appreciate you all. Take care now. Bye-bye.